battle with a supervillain that causes collateral damage, the superheroes are illegalized. In order to meet their family's financial needs, Bob and Helen take up a job at a telecommunications company. Not knowing the scheme behind the offer, the Incredibles are forced to fight other superheroes. What will happen to them? Let's find out in the movie. In an interrogation room, Agent Rick Dicker is questioning Tony Reidinger about the Underminer incident. According to Tony, after he asked his classmate Violet out on a movie date, a supervillain named Underminer attacked the city. As Bob and Helen fought Underminer, Dash checked the perimeter while Violet was left to babysit Jack. Upset, Violet threw down her mask and Tony saw her when he was about to escape. Violet tried to explain, but Tony ran away. But realizing that he had nothing to be afraid of, Tony felt bad for running away. Afterward, Agent Dicker shoots a plunger-like thing at Tony's head to erase his memory of Violet being a superhero. The scene changes to the Underminer incident that Tony is talking about. Bob is clinging onto Underminer's drilling vehicle. Underminer blows up the underground, causing different establishments, including the bank, to collapse. When the supervillain starts collecting money from the bank's vault, Bob finally catches up to him. However, Bob gets sucked by Underminer's huge suction machine. Their fight causes them to damage the vehicle's control system. He goes inside the container of money and the container transforms into a smaller drilling vehicle. As the Underminer escapes, Bob tries to stop the vehicle. However, the huge driller bursts out of the ground. Bob informs Helen of the situation when the driller hits a railway. Luckily, Lucius arrives in time and creates a path made of ice to lead the train to safety. Dash and Violet make sure that the civilians are out of harm's way. On the other hand, the vehicle is unstoppable and it is currently heading to the city hall. Helen and Bob try to stop it from inside. Lucius also freezes the driller's tank thread and creates a stack of ice to prevent the vehicle from destroying the city hall. Meanwhile, Violet, Dash, and Jack follow their parents in the vehicle. As the driller's machine blows up, Violet creates a shield to protect her family. Shortly after, the cops arrive and the Incredibles are cornered. Fortunately, Lucius manages to escape, but a driver catches up to him, asking if he wants to change the law that illegalizes superheroes. Lucius gets interested in the man's proposal and accepts it readily. In the news, the reporter states that the superheroes' battle with Underminer has caused massive collateral damage. On their way to a motel, Violet tells her father about Tony seeing her without her mask. Afterward, Bob tells Agent Dicker about Violet and Tony's situation. This leads to Agent Dicker to erase Tony's memory of Violet being a superhero. Before they leave, Agent Dicker informs Bob and Helen that the superhero program has been shut down. The collateral damage caused by their previous battle became a perfect excuse for politicians to scrap the program. It turns out that the politicians already had their eyes on the superheroes for a long time. Bob and Helen thank Agent Dicker for everything he has done for them. While eating, the family talks about their arrangements and their whole superhero thing. Violet and Dash are not happy with just doing the minor stuff, especially Violet, who's always left babysitting Jack. But Bob and Helen point out that they are not yet old enough to deal directly with the supervillains. Violet and Dash insist that they want to use their powers for good. While Bob agrees to them, Helen does not. The husband and wife start to argue about the illegalization of superheroes. Helen says that they should follow the law, regardless if it is fair or not. But Bob argues that they should not follow unfair laws. The family conversation ends with them settling to follow the law. Afterward, Bob and Helen talk about the future of their family now that they cannot do superhero stuff anymore. Helen remembers the time when Bob was working and how he hated every minute of it. She suggests that it is her time to look for a job while Bob can take care of the kids. Their conversation is interrupted when they hear something from a distance, but it just turns out to be Lucius. Lucius invites them to stay in his house when the family checks out of the motel. Helen declines, saying that they don't want to bother Lucius and his wife Honey with such a big family. Lucius still keeps the offer for them to take whenever they want. Then, he shows them a business card of a man named Winston Dever. Lucius already did a background check on the man, who trained under Agent Dicker, so he is all good and legit. According to Lucius, Winston wants to talk to Bob, Helen, and himself about superhero stuff. Helen is skeptical about the invitation, but Bob suggests that they should at least hear what Winston wants to say. Before going, Lucius reminds them to wear their old supersuit because Winston is a nostalgic man. As Bob and Helen say goodnight to their children, Violet notices that they are wearing their supersuits. As they arrive in DEVTCH, they are greeted by Winston, who's very excited. A woman then arrives and Winston introduces her as Evelyn, his sister. Shortly after, Winston shows the three a portrait of his father. According to Winston, his father was a top supporter of superheroes, and when they were illegalized, Winston's father was saddened. Evelyn butts in and says that their father believed that the world would become more dangerous without superheroes. She adds that their father was killed when some robbers broke into their house and there were no superheroes to call on. A few months later, their mother also died because of heartbreak. After their parents' death, Winston and Evelyn are forced to run their father's company. Luckily, they managed to make it into a world-class telecommunications company with Evelyn as the designer and Winston as the operator. Winston believes that they are in the position to make some wrong things right. At the beginning of the meeting, Winston shows them the aftermath of their battle with Underminer. He says that people only see what the politicians want them to see, which is destruction. But the civilians did not see how hard it was for the superheroes to save as many people as they can and apprehend the supervillain. Winston points out that people lack perception from the hero's point of view. In this regard, the siblings offer Bob, Helen, and Lucius to record them doing superhero stuff to regain people's trust. By putting tiny cameras into their super suits, they can show people how heroes truly work. The three are delighted to accept Winston's offer, especially Bob. However, for the first mission, Winston assigns Helen to the work. Hearing this, Bob is kind of upset. Winston then points out that if they want to launch a perfect program, they need to minimize collateral damage. When asked if she agrees to the plan, Helen cannot come up with an answer just yet. Back in the motel, Bob and Helen talk about the offer of the Devers. Bob says that Helen needs to do it so they can change the law that illegalizes superheroes. Furthermore, their children will have the freedom to use their powers, allowing them to decide whether they truly want to be superheroes or not. Helen notices Bob's frustration and realizes that it is actually him who wants to be a superhero again. Bob admits it, but he also points out that they have no other options. Helen still worries about the children, but Bob assures her that he will take care of them. After accepting Winston's offer, the family moves into one of his properties the next day. After a while, Helen changes into her new suit, but she feels uncomfortable with the dark color. Upon seeing her new suit, Bob is kind of relieved that he is not the first choice for the mission because he doesn't want to get scolded by E, who was the original designer of their super suits. Bob gives her a note from Evelyn that says there is an accessory for Helen in the garage. There, she sees a new electric elasticycle made for her. When Helen is doing superhero duties, Bob is fighting off math homework and daddy duties. Meanwhile, Helen is watching over the mayor's speech on the ribbon cutting of New Urbam's new hover train. She asks Winston if the police will be okay with their arrangements, to which he answers yes. Remembering the incident with Underminer, Evelyn points out that if Helen had dealt with the supervillain alone, the outcome would have been different. Everything is going smoothly at the event until the hover train goes the wrong way. Helen quickly chases after it and manages to get on top of the train. She slams the glass to call the driver's attention, but the driver is weirdly just staring into nothingness. Luckily, Helen manages to stop the train before it falls off the last constructed track. She immediately goes to talk to the driver, but as the driver returns to consciousness, a message appears on the screen welcoming Elastigirl back. The message is from someone named Screenslaver. Meanwhile at home, after putting Jack to sleep, Bob sees Violet sulking in the corner. He tries to talk to her, but she wants to be alone. He then hears the TV turn on and sees that Jack is up again. After a while, when Bob falls asleep, Jack sees a raccoon who looks like the robber in the TV show. While fighting the raccoon, Jack manifests different superpowers. The commotion finally wakes up Bob, and he is so happy to see that his baby also got powers. At this time, Helen calls home, asking how everything is going, but Bob lies about it. He then asks Helen about the mission, to which she answers that it went great. Turning on the TV, Bob watches on different news channels reporting how Helen saved the day. He feels frustrated that he's not doing well at home. Wanting to do better, he studies Dash's math assignment overnight. The next day, Bob wakes Dash early so he can help him study before Dash's test. At school, Violet talks to Tony about their supposed date, but Tony can't remember Violet at all. Going back to Helen, she is now being interviewed about legalizing superheroes again. Suddenly, the host expression and tone go blank. Through the hypnotized host, Screenslaver says he is going to hijack the ambassador's chopper. Helen quickly runs to the nearest window and stretches her way onto one of the choppers. She breaks the monitor in the cockpit and then saves all the people in the chopper, including the ambassador. Back at home, Violet rants about Tony forgetting about her after seeing her in her suit. Bob says that it's better that way, revealing that he asked Agent Dicker to erase Tony's memory of Violet being a superhero. But it turns out that it made Tony completely forget about Violet. Going back to Helen, she witnesses a protest in support of her and other superheroes. When she is interacting with a child protester, the child shows Helen the sign that says Screenslaver is still out there. Helen talks to Winston about Screenslaver, saying that she's frustrated because they haven't caught the supervillain yet. Winston says she doesn't need to worry a lot about Screenslaver. What's important is that they are getting the results they initially planned to get. He then leads Helen to a room where other superheroes are waiting. These superheroes are all inspired by Helen, who came out of the shadows. They have a mini get-together celebration. Afterward, Helen and Evelyn have a conversation about them being overshadowed by their male counterparts. However, Evelyn insists that she chose to work behind the scenes. But Helen, who is always doing a good job, is still overshadowed by Bob. Then she suddenly comes up with an idea to capture Screenslaver. Helen asked for Evelyn's help, and they plan to stage an interview. When Screenslaver hacks into their signal, they will lock onto him and trace its origin. The next day, Bob calls Dicker and asks for his help with Tony. After knowing where Tony works part-time, Bob drives the kids to that place. Not knowing what her father has done, Violet is surprised when she sees Tony working as a waiter there. Bob tries to be a wingman for his daughter and Tony, but Violet feels ashamed and excuses herself. Later that night, the interview with Helen takes place, and as expected, Screenslaver interrupts the program. Helen manages to lock on the supervillain's location and immediately goes there. She finds the blueprint of both the hover train and chopper that were attacked before it in the villain's hideout. Unfortunately, Helen is trapped by Screenslaver inside a room glowing with hypnotizing spirals. She is forced to fight with her eyes closed, but she's still winning over Screenslaver. The supervillain tries to escape after triggering a bomb in his apartment. When Helen catches him, the bomb explodes, burning all the evidence in the apartment. She unmasks the villain, but the man behind the mask suddenly forgets what happened. Meanwhile, Bob sees on the TV that his old car, the Incredible, is currently at auction. He quickly looks for the remote of his car, but he realizes that if he steals his car back, Helen will be distracted. To make his situation worse, Violet and Dash also discover that Jack has powers. As they bombard him with questions, Bob finally loses his cool. He is very frustrated with himself for doing a mediocre job as a father, clearly not living up to his moniker Mr. Incredible. After seeing her father's situation, Violet calls Lucius for help. Knowing Jack's condition, Lucius suggests that Bob needs to ask someone for help. Bob then goes to E to develop a suit to regulate Jack's powers. He suggests leaving Jack to E for the night so she can study him. Edna declines at first, but after seeing Jack's powers, she changes her mind. On the other hand, Helen is celebrating with the Devers after catching Screenslaver, and the superheroes are legalized again. Winston announces that they will gather superheroes and world leaders in a yacht for a televised signing ceremony. After a while, Helen notices something strange from the feed of her fight with Screenslaver. Back at home, Bob apologizes to Violet about Tony forgetting about her, saying that he just wants to be a good dad. Violet is touched and she embraces her father, assuring him that he's not just a good father, but a super one. Going back to Helen, she's rewatching the video of her fight with Screenslaver when Evelyn shows up for a drink. Helen continues what she's doing and she finds that her camera feed is connected to one of Screenslaver's monitors. She then realizes that the man they caught is innocent and is only controlled by a screen attached to the mask. That is when Evelyn suddenly shoves the goggles into Helen's eyes to hypnotize and control her. It turns out that Evelyn is the real Screenslaver. The next day, after getting a well-deserved 17 hours of sleep, Bob picks up Jack from E. E reveals to Bob that Jack is a polymorph. That's why he has many superpowers. Showing him a demonstration of Jack's powers, Edna gives Bob a tracker to monitor the baby's power. The scene changes back to Helen, who now is tied up in a freezing room which can limit her stretching abilities. Evelyn reveals that she holds resentment against the superheroes for the death of her parents. She plans to sabotage the ceremony to tarnish the reputation of all superheroes, making them illegalized forever. Meanwhile, while Bob is having fun demonstrating Jack's powers to Violet and Dash, Evelyn calls him. She asks him to go to the yacht because Helen is in trouble. After the call, Bob immediately rushes there. Seeing Bob all suited up, Violet orders Dash to suit up as well. However, some hypnotized superheroes show up at the door. At this time, Lucius arrives to stop the heroes from taking the kids. A battle takes place, but Lucius and the kids are not the match for them. Luckily, the Incredible comes in the clutch after Dash activates it. However, the hypnotized heroes manage to put on a pair of goggles on Lucius. Then, the children escape immediately. The scene changes to Bob's meeting with Evelyn. She leads him to a room where Helen ambushes him. Bob doesn't want to fight Helen, so she manages to put on a pair of goggles on him when they kiss. Now Evelyn finally has full control of two strongest superheroes. At this time, the children follow the ship using the Incredible. Violet uses her invisibility to search for her parents while Dash babysits Jack-Jack. But Jack-Jack wanders off, leaving Dash alone. Violet is also spotted by a hypnotized hero named Void. After defeating Void, she immediately returns to Dash, only to find out that Jack-Jack is missing. After a while, Violet and Dash manage to find Jack-Jack, but they are spotted by the hypnotized heroes. Being chased by them, the kids choose to hide in a vent. Then all of a sudden, Jack-Jack suddenly goes large and pins down the hypnotized superheroes. Jack-Jack runs away afterward. Meanwhile, Bob, Helen, and Lucius come to the signing room. After completing the signing of the superhero accords, Evelyn begins the Phase 2 of the mission. She makes Bob, Helen, and Lucius talk bad about the civilians, saying that they won't help clean the public's mess anymore. Furthermore, they hijack the ship. At this time, Violet, Dash, and Jack-Jack show up, and the baby telekinetically removes Helen's goggles. Regaining back her consciousness, Helen fights Bob and Lucius and removes their goggles. Evelyn then orders other hypnotized heroes to fight the Incredibles and Lucius. One by one, the superheroes remove the goggles from the hypnotized heroes as well. Seeing this, Evelyn takes Winston and tries to escape. Helen and Void come after them, while Bob goes to shut down the engine. Realizing what his sister has done, Winston jumps back to the ship. At this time, Void opens up a portal inside Evelyn's jet, but Evelyn flies the jet so high that Helen starts to lose oxygen. Bob and Lucius try their best to turn around the ship before it crashes into the city. Back on the jet, Helen shoots a flare gun at Evelyn's oxygen tank, causing her to fly out of the jet. She then immediately turns the jet around and stretches her way to catch Evelyn. Meanwhile, Winston breaks the monitor that hypnotizes the delegates of the ceremony, and Bob and Lucius manage to turn the ship at the last second. Lucius then stops the ship's momentum by creating a massive ice wall, preventing the ship from crashing into a building. Winston thanks Helen for saving his sister, who is then arrested. At last, the legal status of superheroes is restored. A few days later, Violet finally has the courage to reintroduce herself to Tony. The two decide to go on a movie date with Violet's whole family.